First and foremost, welcome everybody. We have a. I feel bad. We have like the East Coasters who are just they've already started without us, and then we have the West Coasters who are sometimes diving out of work a little bit early in order to get to our session. So I'm going to start off, and we'll sort of flow in as we go. But I have a really esteemed panel this evening that I'm very excited to share with everybody. We have three gentlemen who kind of sort of love whiskey a little bit, and so they may be able to wax slightly poetic about it. We have Bruce Russell, who puts the Russell in Russell's Reserve, and he is his current title is the National Whiskey Educator. And so the whiskeys that he covers are Wild Turkey and Russell's Reserve. He was thinking of changing his name to Bruce Turkey, but decided to stick with what he had. And then over here on my left, at least on my screen, is Robert Sickler. Robert was one of the, I actually met him when he was the very early program by the Diageo whiskey portfolio. So it covered everything from American to single malt, and stunning portfolio. And he was part of a small group of very high echelon educators around the country, and then has a bar in Denver, and now is the owner proprietor of a wonderful bar and restaurant in Tampa. If any of you are nearby, highly recommend that you go and visit him. Absolutely. And then Michael Lazaro is over here, who again has crushed us all with his whiskey collection. Lazaro, you got to unmute. We actually do want to hear what you have to say.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Yeah. No, that's
Michael is the former gentleman in charge of the crazy American whiskey collection at Hardwater in San Francisco, which we are all dying to have them reopen. They've still been closed since after COVID, and it's kind of crazy. But are you at home right now? Is that your collection at home with the ladder? Okay.
No, all right. That's Hardwater.
Okay. All right. I was going to say
what it used to look like.
All right. So for those of you who have never been, Hardwater is on the Embarcadero in San Francisco, and it's how tall is the back bar? About 60, 70
probably
feet?
About 15 feet. You're just seeing first the bottom 3 or 4 shelves. And it spans the width of the back wall. We had about 450 different whiskeys up there, and plus a bunch of collectibles that we didn't actually sell, but we showed off. You can see some of them on the top shelf there. Yeah, it was insane.
It's insane to look at when you go into, you're like, I'm going to go into this place and get a little drink. I hear they make, they have good snacks and good cocktails. And then you go in and you're just dumbfounded and your jaw drops just looking at that back wall.
Yeah.
But so there's a couple things that I'd like to discuss. As you guys know, most of our Shaker and Spoon family are all cocktail lovers. And so this particular session that we have together today, we're going to be talking more about bourbon and that specific category of American whiskey. One of our whiskeys this month that was chosen by Sam Jimenez is the 5 Trail, and they are categorized as an American whiskey, but 85% of it is bourbon, right? So they still sort of fall into this category of, age between, 6.5, 7, and 10 years, and just a really outstanding product, just sort of crushing it right out of the gate. I actually would have mine up also, but we already finished it. So I thought it would be weird to have an empty bottle behind me. But what I really want to chat about with you guys and hear from you are a couple of things. Number one, I want to talk about bourbon for those who really want to understand the category and how it is categorized, because I think a lot of people still don't understand that it doesn't all have to come from this particular state right here. I also would like to dive into a little bit of discussion, especially between Bruce and Michael, about the secondary market, which is out of control. Bruce and I just talked about it a little bit yesterday. And then also, I would love for Robert to dive into not only the inspiration for his cocktail that he made for the Bring on the Bourbon box, shaker and spoon, but also in general, how he likes to construct cocktails around bourbon as a spirit. So I'd love to actually, Robert, if you would start us off by telling us a little bit about your restaurant and then how you come up with, in particular, bourbon cocktails.
Sure. My place is actually a natural wine bistro, and the cuisine is going to be Latin Caribbean meets Creole Cajun. So it kind of ties in my wife's Caribbean roots. She was born in Puerto Rico. And then I spent a great many years living in New Orleans, and a great amount of time in New Orleans, even when I wasn't living in New Orleans. And I have a real deep reverence for the city and the culture and the food and the music and the heritage and the art and the aesthetics of the place. I could go on and on. So we kind of wanted to bring a piece of New Orleans and a piece of the Caribbean to Florida. And I mean, obviously there's plenty of Caribbean influence here, but it's rarely captured in the same manner in which we've effectively done so. When you walk into our place, you definitely feel like you've walked into another portal and you've been transferred to, some island in the Caribbean or perhaps some little bar in New Orleans. It's got the exposed brick, Caribbean blue walls, lots of folk art from Haiti and Mexico and all the places that we've traveled together. So it's kind of a love affair between my wife and I. I chose natural wine because there weren't any cocktail bars available for purchase when I first arrived back in Tampa. I was in Denver the last 6 years with Finn's Manor. But we are looking for a space to move our place, which is called Bayou Bodega. And we are going to go right back to our cocktail roots. And the new manifestation of this will be full-on cocktail, and we'll still have natural wine, however, as the wine availability. My love of natural wine is basically based on the fact that first and foremost, it's clean. There's no pesticides, no fungicides, no herbicides. There's no added sugar. There's no added sulfites. It's all spontaneous yeast. It's wine the way wine was made before the Industrial Revolution. Now on to the bourbon thing. As far as bourbon cocktails go, it kind of depends what the direction of the cocktail I'm trying to go. You've got obviously softer bourbons that are comprised of maybe a wheat mash bill, and then you've got the spicier bourbons that have a higher rye recipe. As a Scotch whiskey guy, I tend to like the high ryes a lot. They really resonate with my palate, and I like the earthiness, the herbaceous character that you get from a rye. And so with those types of cocktails, I generally pair them with bold modifiers like really rich, earthy vermouths from Spain, perhaps, or some interesting amaros, just interesting liqueurs or amaros that have a lot of character, and that because with the rye-based bourbon, it's always going to hold up. Whereas a softer bourbon, I'd have to be careful with the ingredients of the secondary components.
And does ABV come into play for you as well in terms of
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Because if you have a wheated bourbon with an appropriate high ABV, they can be just as beautiful as any rye whiskey, as far as I'm concerned. So I do love wheated bourbons when they're a little higher ABV. I think they're beautiful. But yeah, ABV plays a big role in how much you add to kind of counteract the heat that you're going to get from that higher alcohol content.
And then how did you come up with this? I mean, tell folks a little bit about obviously the story behind the naming of your drink, but also how you came up with this particular cocktail.
I grew up in South Florida on a canal that connects directly to the Caloosahatchee River. It's a river that I have deep fondness for. I love, bodies of water, as many of us do, I'm sure. But I am kind of a freak for the rivers in the South. Like they have some type of mysticism to them that really appeals to me. But I have really good memories of the Caloosahatchee. I boated on it as a kid. I took little dinghies out there. I went, kayaking, water skiing, et cetera, et cetera. And my yard had an abundance of citrus. We had a gigantic grapefruit tree. We had a lemon tree. We had an orange tree. We had a tangerine tree. We had a gigantic mango tree. And as a kid, I used to just go out and eat fruit all the time. And it was cute. I had a Doberman pincher, and he would jump up and grab the mangoes and sit there and tear them apart on the ground and gnaw on them, which was kind of cute because you don't normally associate dogs getting down on fruit, but this one did. I tried a whole bunch of different sodas. At first I was thinking yuzu, just because I love yuzu, but I found it was a little too dry for the cocktail. And then I tried some others that were a little too sweet. And then I discovered this orange. Well, the orange had the most backbone and the most character about it. And it seemed to just hold up really well with the bourbon. And then, of course, you've got this orange, and then you've got this wood, spice, oak, vanilla of this bourbon. What are you going to do to like explode this and instead of just leaving it in this stagnant realm? And I was like, I need to do like a lemon syrup or a lemongrass syrup and throw some ginger in, the quintessential ingredient that goes so well with bourbon and many other whiskeys for that matter. And so I kind of toyed around with that and dialed down the recipe to, the way that I thought tasted best. I wanted it to be a very refreshing, I knew it was coming out this time of year. So I wanted it to be extraordinarily refreshing, very approachable, almost a porch pounder that you could just really enjoy. You don't need to sit down and sip and savor and try to contemplate and analyze. Just drink it and enjoy it and get down.
There's actually some people on the happy hour who are really happy houring this happy hour and enjoying your cocktail right now. So I can see in the comments. So that's great to see.
Awesome.
It's funny, like Michael may remember this actually. There was a cocktail that Reza made years ago that still stuck with me. I think he made this for the Domaine de Canton competition back in like 2008, where he used Elijah Craig when it was still called Elijah Craig 12. Elijah Craig, Canton, maraschino, and lemon shaken up cherry, and it was just a banger of a drink. It like every single layer played, and it was one of the things that, again, when you're helping to launch a brand like Canton, that is a modifier. At the end of the day, you're looking for the things that pair well with it, and I think that was the one that stood out the most in terms of that, because again, that whiskey and ginger match works so well, like incredibly well together. But your drink was very delicious, and I'm so glad that we've got people who are enjoying it literally at this exact moment in time. So thank you for that.
And obviously, the orange components obviously tie in with the oranges in the house, and I wanted it to be a Florida themed cocktail. We're known for our oranges down here, so that's kind of where that all goes. But anyway, that's enough.
As a perfect mix. Bruce, question for you. You have such an interesting legacy to carry. No pressure. You have such an interesting legacy to carry, both in your family, but also these products that are iconic in whiskey in general, and in particular in like the Bourbon Kingdom. And so I would love if you would give our Shaker and Spoon fam some background here on how Wild Turkey came to be. A little bit of history about that and your grandfather, and then also Russell's Reserve before it was Russell's Reserve. I think a lot of people here probably don't know that story, and it's really fascinating. So if you would share that, we would love it.
Yeah, sure thing. I even got a bottle of the original Russell's here that I'll show off whenever we get to the story. But hey, everybody. I'm Bruce Russell. They call me all kinds of things because I'm doing a little bit of everything at the distillery right now. But I'm a brand educator. I'm now helping with the blending on some of our new products and LTOs and some of our rye whiskeys. I'm in control of our private barrel program. It's probably my favorite thing I get to do. But yeah, we'll touch on a little history because Granddad almost started around the same time the brand did. He's been around forever. I call him Mimmy. So if I don't call him Granddad or Jimmy and I say Mimmy, I don't have like I do have an accent, but not like a speech impediment. So that's what we call Jimmy. That's what the first grandchild called him. So that's what he got stuck with. Like a lot of other brands, though, we weren't always what we're known today. You know, our modern name is Wild Turkey. Before that, we were a few other things. We were originally the Rippy Brothers brand, or Old Rippy. There were two brothers that came over from Ireland, and they started to make whiskey in a place that they tried to name Tyrone, Ireland, or Tyrone, Kentucky, because they were from Tyrone, Ireland. It's spelled like the name Tyrone, and we're from Kentucky, so we call it Tyrone. It's right next to Versailles, which could probably also be Versailles, but we just come up with our own names, I guess. They made whiskey there and did a very good job of it. They started in the mid 1800s, made it all the way until Prohibition hit. They closed up shop during Prohibition, and then after Prohibition, they still had a lot of good whiskey left over. They were actually pretty good at keeping afloat and were able to open right back up. And after Prohibition, our main brand was JTS Brown, actually. We were known as JTS Brown and Sons for quite a while. Even by the time Jimmy started, and for a long time after Jimmy had started, we were still JTS Brown and Sons. Wild Turkey was just a contract brand we made. And so, believe it or not, you know, a lot of people today, some people don't even know what contract distilling is, or non-distilling producers, but a lot of brands who don't make their own liquid, and there's nothing wrong with that. They buy it from somebody else, and then they blend it themselves. A lot of times age it themselves. And I think some of the best brands out there are about juice right now. And that's kind of how Wild Turkey got started. There used to be an industry trip that a lot of distillers in Kentucky would take, where they'd go to the Carolinas and they'd go turkey hunting. There was always a joke, I think, back then that, you know, don't forget to bring the guns this year, because I don't think there were many animals killed on these hunting trips. They were really just trying to get away and probably drink a lot more than they should. A guy that was actually the largest wholesale grocer in the country, he was the CEO of the Austin Nichols Company. They were out of New York, New York. He got invited on one of these trips. His name was Tom McCarthy. Tom came on the trip, but they told him, you know, you're not a distiller, so you don't get to come for free. So you need to bring your own whiskey. Well, he brought some whiskey from our distillery that he was actually buying. He was buying juice from the JTS Brown and Sons distillery. He was packaging it up as like an Austin Nichols label, just like if you went to, you know, a liquor store and they had their own, you know, label there. Kirkland brands, essentially, you know, from back then. They figured out what we figured out on that trip, because they just gave him something random. Well, it was 8 years old, and everybody was like, this is way better than the normal stuff we've been drinking. Well, he was rich enough to turn an inside joke into a brand. So during that trip, they called it Tom's Wild Turkey Whiskey. He started to promote it in his stores as his new brand label, and it really took off. And that was in 1940. And checked at our distillery, it was 8 years old. It was one-on-one proof, and so that's what he ran with. In just 2 years, he thought he had a good enough idea to take it nationwide. He did. So in 1942, Wild Turkey had its first national release. And kind of the cool thing is, for a while, it wasn't just made at our distillery, because our major product was JTS Brown and Sons, which Heaven Hill still makes a pretty good bottled and bond JTS Brown if you ever get a chance.
Yes, here in Kentucky.
Yeah, and I think it is only available here.
It's only available in Kentucky.
Nice. We've got a lot of good stuff here, but it's usually the middle shelf stuff. It took off, but we weren't the only ones that were making it, because we had other things. So if you find an old bottle of Wild Turkey that would have been in the 40s and 50s, which those are super hard to find. I only know of one person that actually still has bottles. It's a guy named David James up in New York. But it might have not been made at our distillery, because he was just buying contract juice. It could have been from many famous distilleries that was operating right after Prohibition. Because a lot of the distilleries that people know of that are famous now, that are now defunct, you know, and you think of like old national distillers places, Shinley, you know, Bernheim, places like that. they were around. They didn't go defunct really until much later. So who knows where that juice would have came from. I've only ever got to try old stuff like that once. It didn't taste like us, so it's pretty cool. And then Granddad started pretty shortly thereafter that. He started in 1954. So I'm third generation of people that have any influence on the whiskey, because I'm not a master distiller. I don't know if I'll ever consider myself a master. I'm just trying to learn. But I think I'm fifth generation that actually was working at that distillery. Jimmy's dad worked at the distillery. His granddad worked in distilleries, and we think he worked in ours. He definitely worked at Old Joe. And then my grandmother was actually working at the distillery before my grandfather Jimmy started. She was older. They met in high school, and she kind of waited for my granddad to graduate before they got married. Very small town Kentucky. And Jimmy had aspirations to be a professional baseball player actually at the time, and do other things. And he was pretty good at sports. So he might have had a chance, but you didn't make very much money doing that, even if you made the major leagues. And so my grandmother told him he needed to get a real job because she was going to have my aunt. And she helped secure him a job at Wild Turkey. And because Jimmy was so beloved in our community because of the sports, and he was also playing kind of like semi-pro baseball and stuff at the time, and they gave him a really cushy job. And he actually got to start off in the lab. He actually, out of 4 of my family members, including him, me, my dad, Jimmy, and then I have a cousin, Joanne, who helps us out as a brand ambassador now. He's awesome. He had the best job starting out. Dad had the worst. He started at the bottom. But Jimmy actually got to start off as a lab tech, as a quality control person. Because of that, he actually got to meet our master distiller, first day, and work with him hand in hand. And our master distiller at that time was a guy named Bill Hughes, who actually made our whiskey as a young fella before Prohibition, came back as a very old man after Prohibition and taught Jimmy everything he knew. So the reason why we're in charge now, as far as the whiskey making is concerned, is just luck. Him and Jimmy became fast friends. I think it was because Jimmy was very adamant about learning. He was annoying, some would say, in his pestering of Bill Hughes. And Bill Hughes was not a very nice man by many accounts. He was a very gruff guy, pretty stern, but Jimmy didn't care. He didn't take no for an answer. He was obsessed with it. He actually gave me, and Dad had never seen him before, a couple notebooks of his when he was in his 20s, trying to just learn everything. And in these notebooks, there's everything from, very high level chemistry of what's going on in our distillery to how to do practical things like grow yeast or how to tell if a fermentation is bad by smell. And then there were also things that just listed like, Mr. Hughes has good handwriting. I need to practice my handwriting. Or Mr. Hughes wears a suit every day. So like that was important to Jimmy. And Jimmy did. My granddad wore a suit to work every single day until about 10 years ago. Now no distillers wear suits anymore. And they shouldn't. It's ridiculous that he had to sit in like a 150-degree still and take proofs wearing a nice suit. But that's what he did. He thought that was important. And Mr. Hughes passed away 13 years after my granddad started. So he was in his early 30s. And we were owned at that time by 2 guys called the Gould brothers. And they walked around and were like, well, Mr. Hughes has been making our whiskey for 50 years or so. We don't really know what to do. And Jimmy just raised his hand. He's like, I know how to do everything. So, they kind of got stuck with Jimmy, whether they wanted to or not, because he's the one that actually had the recipes and the ways of working, and he knew how everything ran. And luckily for them, I think they got the best modern whiskey distiller that's lived. I think if you try some of Jimmy's stuff from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, even on into the mid-90s, until Dad really started to become active, and it was kind of a tandem. I think it's some of, if not the best American whiskey that's ever been made. I mean, the depth of flavor, people call it the Wild Turkey funk, but there's almost a rum-like dark fruit and just deep like cocos and caramels and sweet tobacco and just an earthiness that is unmatched even in other Dusties. So Jimmy really had something going on. There's a very famous story of when Pernod bought us in 81. They asked him what his yield was, which is like the most basic thing if you're a distiller. And that's how many 100 proof gallons that you're going to get out of a bushel or 56 pounds of grain. And they probably wanted Jimmy to say 5 something, and Jimmy said, I don't know and I don't care and you shouldn't either. Well, they're a for-profit business, so they didn't really like that. But they were stuck with Jimmy. But what he meant by that is like, I make good whiskey, and as long as we're all making money, let's all be happy that we're making whiskey as good as we are. And we really can't make whiskey the way that he did. He did it a little bit slower than everybody else. He did it a very particular way. It would have been very easy for him to change, and he didn't. My grandmother hates that about him sometimes, that he's so stubborn. But he, you know, he lives in like you could buy his house for $100,000 easily. He drives a 98 Ford Ranger that he's driven since 98. He eats at the same restaurants every single day of every single week. He drinks 3 things. He drinks bourbon, iced tea, and 1 cup of black coffee every Saturday morning. Like, he is a creature of habit. And I think the work aspect of that, where he only really made one-on-one for the most part for a very, very long time, it kept us afloat when a lot of other people went down, because we could always just kind of rely on the little engine that could, which was one-on-one. And then Dad came around in 81. He started in the union bottom man up. And then he really did work his way up. So he has a completely different view on the way a distillery works, because it's very influenced through a rick house, through maturation, through blending, through secondary aging, stuff like that. And I think that influences what he likes, which is old whiskey, compared to Jimmy. If you look at Master's Keeps, the average age of our Master's Keeps releases are like 15 years old. Jimmy, he's very famous for saying, I like 6 to 12-year-old whiskey. And then you'll have somebody raise their hand. What about Master's Keep 17? And Jimmy will get real quiet and stare him and say, I like 6 to 12-year-old whiskey. So they don't agree at work. They agree at home because my grandmother makes it. But they don't really get along at work. They like very different things. And then I came along 12 years ago now. The same way Dad did. We both got summer jobs when we turned 21 and just never left. And for me, it was all about family at first. Even though I love whiskey, I've been around whiskey my entire life, because Dad wasn't around it that much when he was a kid, because it wasn't a good business to be in. It would just be like if your dad was a used car salesman or an accountant or whatever, you know. It's kind of a little bit more of a everyday job. And by the time I was a kid, it was cool, you know, and so I was around it a lot. But I started when I was 21. I was probably in it for 3 or 4 weeks. And then Dad kind of took me aside and said, let me take you around the distillery and really show you some stuff. And Dad had made me talk to me 35 minutes my entire life. And we spent an entire afternoon talking to each other. And same thing kind of happened with Jimmy. I went on the road with him for the first time to a whiskey fest, and got to see him out and about. And we actually went to Hardwater that week. But we walked into a bar in San Francisco and people clapped for him when we walked in. And I was like, what in the hell? Like, why are they clapping for Mimi? This is weird. And I got to see the other side of him, where he is a character. He's a storyteller. He's a snake oil salesman. And I mean that in a very loving way. He's going to have somebody sitting in his lap laughing and crying. And, you know, he stays out till 4 or 5 in the morning every time if you let him, and is up at 8 a.m. bright eyed and bushy tailed to do the next day, because he just loves being around people.
Well, that's probably due to his weekly cup of coffee. It really like gets him.
It is, yeah. Keeps him going. It's fuel, you know.
I got a story about him.
Get me with it. Go for it.
That you made me think of it when you mentioned the 4 to 5. Years ago, I was doing a trade show tasting in West Virginia, and all these different, you know, whiskey people were there to present their products, their brands, and we had an event the evening before. I was at a table next to David Blackmore with Glenmorangie, and he asked me, we were both in kilts. He's like, so do you want to go out on the town after this is through? And I'm like, absolutely. And he said, well, do you think we should go back to the hotel and change? And I said, absolutely not. I'm man enough to go out in West Virginia in a kilt if you are, laddie. And he said, oh, yeah, absolutely. So we went out, and I didn't know what I was going to encounter. But we went into this bar, and they literally started screaming, freedom, and like embraced us, and were like wanting to know what clan we were and talking about their Celtic heritage. Next thing you know, these guys are going out to their car, bringing in their homemade moonshine and sharing it with us. And we had to be at the office at 7 a.m. the next day. We're drinking moonshine. I'm buying whiskey. David's buying whiskey. The night's going late. Next thing you know, it's like 3:30 in the morning. The bar's closing. Finally, I'm thinking, thank God, I'm going to go home and get a few hours of sleep. I pay my tab. I'm like, let's get out of here. We go to walk up to the door. All of a sudden, Jimmy Russell throws the door open. He's got these cute young girls, like as his little entourage, and he goes, sit down, boys. You're not going anywhere. Walks in, orders a round of turkey for everybody at the bar. I'm like, oh, shit. And he like held the whole bar captive with, stories and entertaining people and talking, and a real amazing showman. And we were really hurting the next day, but it was worth every bit of it. And you sharing all that backdrop, man, that's really special. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. It's my favorite thing when people tell me how they've been jimmied. It's everybody, and you run into him, you've had one of those nights, and it usually is just he has his favorites. Delilah's is probably the one I think people have gotten jimmied in the most. Chicago, but if you run into him and there's one person that will talk shop with him, talk about whiskey, just talk about life, Jimmy will sit there and the thing that blows my mind, he's 87 now. And you'll have people walk into the visitor center, and right away he'll see him, his eyes will go big, and he'll say, oh, hey, so-and-so, how are your kids and your wife? And that, how was that Little League game? And they'll have met 16 years ago, He's one of a kind. And I just hope that I do good enough that he doesn't haunt me. That's my goal in life.
I think he's gonna haunt you no matter what, but hopefully it'll be for good things.
Yeah.
It'll
be a good old
like
Kentucky spirit,
kicking the foot of the bed and being like, TikTok, it's time to get out.
Yeah.
It's gonna be that. Thank you for sharing that. I really, really appreciate it. And I feel like if anybody that's on this happy hour or watching it later ever has the opportunity to get jimmied, it's worth it. It's worth it. Michael, a question for you. We talked a little bit about I talked a little bit earlier, or a couple of years ago, actually, about secondary market, and having been the steward of such an insane collection. My conversation with Bruce the other day reminded me that it was something that I wanted to ask you about, and I'm sure Robert has some comments as well. For those of you who are looking, like, for example, the whiskey, the bourbon that Christine Wiseman recommended for her cocktail was the Russell's 10-year. And there's also a 13 that came out at like $70 that vanished in like 2 minutes. And then Bruce was telling me is now like only in secondary market. And if you can get somebody to do you a favor, you can get it for $700, right? So there's crazy stuff like that going on. In terms of what you saw in general at Hardwater, what are some of the, again, something that will like help the Shaker and Spoon audience, what are some of the more reasonably priced great bourbons out there that still surprise you that they haven't gone crazy?
Sure, let's think about this. There's a lot of, so the secondary market's fueled by this whole, obsession with things that are scarce and provide bragging rights for the person who's buying it, who may never even open the bottle up. I mean, there are a lot of really serious drinkers out there who are fishing on the secondary market, but I would say there are a lot of people who are just buying the bottles just to have and show off. There's a ton of, we are really in an amazing time right now in terms of what's available that you can just go into the store and pick up. I cannot emphasize enough how much I love the Elijah Craig, what's now small batch. I think is a really good value. Unfortunately, prices have gone up on everything. I would have in the past probably mentioned Henry Mckenna, which is another Heaven Hill pour, but that now has become harder and harder to get, and the price has gone up and up on it. But fortunately, there's no plan for the distillery to stop releasing it as a regular mark. So it's not allocated, it's not anything. The only thing that makes it hard to get, honestly, is the fact that everyone's buying it. So those are two that come to mind right away. Here in Kentucky, where there's a few things that one cannot get outside the state. We mentioned that JTS Brown bottled and bond, which will set you back a whopping $12. Is actually really pretty good. That's another Heaven Hill pour. But there's also an old Bardstown bottled and bond, which is from Willett or KBD, Kentucky Bourbon Distillers. It is only available here in Kentucky and has been the case for quite a while. That will set you back all of about $14 to $17, depending on when you pick it up. It is outstanding. I see someone made a comment about Blanton's. Blanton's has become like hen's teeth now. It's very, very difficult to find. If a bottle shows up someplace, it's gone instantly. It may not even show up on the shelves because a lot of liquor store owners won't even put it out. They'll just pass it on to special customer X, Y, or Z, which is another thing which isn't really a secondary market trait, but a lot of liquor stores don't put everything out. They hold things back. Even finding Buffalo Trace sometimes can be difficult as a result of all of this. So, is that
David Jones posted Eagle Rare 10. You already commented on Mike's comment on Blanton's. The Eagle Rare 10, one of the first ever single barrels, was actually at Blackwell's in San Francisco. I mean, this was I want to say 2004. It was early 2000s. Yeah. And this for those of you with us today, Blackwell's is a family-owned specialty wine and liquor store in the outer avenues in San Francisco. It's very much like a neighborhood store, but you can always count on, like a lot of stores near you, the ones that Shaker and Spoon's always talking about. Like you can always go to the sort of like those big stores to find things that are nationally distributed. But if you want stuff that's interesting and esoteric, those are the guys that people who make interesting and esoteric things will go to. Not that, things at big stores aren't great. There's a lot of amazing products. Like I get blown away when I walk into Total Wine. It's nuts, the variety of things that they have there. But Blackwell's is the kind of place that was the first time I ever saw a store that bought a barrel.
And now people will line up when they go to visit Frankfurt at Buffalo Trace. And
it was Blanton's day to day, Michael.
Yeah, and they will buy a bottle of Eagle Rare. That's what they'll get. That's what's being sold, and that's what people are lining up for.
Yeah. And it was stuff that they honestly, I felt like those stores could not get rid of. They couldn't 15, 20 years ago, they wanted people to like understand how great these things were, and now they're, of course.
Is this where I get to tell the story about Slanted Door using Van Winkle Family Reserve, the Lot B as their well bourbon, because they used to buy it by the barrel?
Sure, you can absolutely do that. You'll probably get a couple death threats in the chat, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, they used to buy that by the barrel at Slanted Door. So Slanted Door is the Vietnamese restaurant in San Francisco at the Ferry Building. There's one now someplace in San Ramon in the boonies, excerpts. But when they first started that, my boss, a guy named Eric Adkins, they used to buy for the Van Winkle Family Reserve Lot B by the barrel for the well. And what happened was they'd be sent, if you buy by the barrel, if folks aren't aware, typically you're sent a set of samples. And back then you didn't have to go to the distillery to do a pick. You could do it remotely. They would send you a bunch of samples. You would get kind of an open-ended amount of time, maybe a couple of weeks to go and decide which one you wanted. And then you let your rep know, yes, we want this barrel. And then they bottle it up and send it to you. And so they ran that in the well. Then a couple of years go by, and instead of being sent 5 samples, they're sent 3 samples. Then that went to 2 samples. And then it went to this, here's a sample, but it was picked for you by whoever, Julian. Julian picked this for you. And that was the last year that they got it, and that was the last year they bought it. But they ran that in the well, and there's still a bunch of those bottles floating about. But that's how much the market has changed. Do you remember at Flora, Tom was running the Hirsch 16 in a Manhattan because he couldn't move the stuff. I think he was charging like $18. They were thinking, who's going to buy a Manhattan for 18 bucks? And we have so much of this, but let's do it anyway and see how it turns out. And, you know, obviously.
Right. And that was, I mean, if you want to talk, you know, again, for those of you who, Hirsch is was a small producer. Actually, the first time I learned about it was through Henry Price. Henry Price is a predominantly an importer who brings in a lot of the really cool liqueurs and things that you found, including things like Lazaro that a lot of you know about. Those are all, good Lord, what's another one that like everyone knows now, that one of like a dozen things that he sort of brought to bars. Anyway, Hirsch was one of those whiskeys that I remember, same thing, that they were trying to like blow it out at events and things because people didn't know anything about it. And, you know, for those who, you know, knew great whiskey, they were like, I can't believe how inexpensive this stuff is. And it was one of a number of things that Henry brought in that, you know, if you guys ever see anything in your store that says Price Imports on it, the likely, and it looks kind of like an old label and it's a whiskey or a cognac or an Armagnac or what have you, just buy it. Because if you're the, you know, someone on here posted about like not wanting to save things. Oh yeah, like Mike said about his Blantons, he's like, I'm opening that, like I'm not saving it. So if you see something at a store that says Price Imports on the label, if you are thirsty, drink it because it's going to be good. If you are a collector and looks like an old label, it's probably something that has already been bought and sold 10 times over, and you should put it away for a great gift.
So someone wrote something about bottled and bond, and I wanted to mention a lot of smaller so-called craft distilleries. I don't like using that term so much because some of these distilleries are actually fairly high capacity, but they're not the big guys. A lot of them are now able to do bottled and bond because they've got product that's 4 years old, and so they're kind of showing off, putting things out there. So that's something else to go be looking for, are some of these bottled and bonds from smaller distilleries.
So if you can explain to Mike really quickly what that entails.
Oh, so real simple. So bottled and bond was essentially the first standard or the first move by the federal government to create a standard of identity for whiskey. 1897 was when the legislation was passed. It involved actually the labor of a guy named E.H. Taylor, which a bunch of people probably know the name Taylor, because that's where we got a whole bunch of the stuff at Buffalo Trace from. But in 1897, they passed this legislation, and what they did was they brought into law the definition of a whiskey, which could only be made at a distillery from actual grain. It couldn't be rectified, it couldn't be flavored, et cetera. So it means that the definition is as follows. It's whiskey from one distillery, from one distilling season, so either the fall or the spring, that's still honored. It is at least a minimum of 4 years of age. This was added later. It wasn't in the original 1897 legislation, but today it needs to be 4 years old. It will be bottled at 100 proof. Nothing will be added to it but water. And the legislation actually also defined the sizes of the bottles and the number of bottles in a case that the bourbon would be shipped out through. So they really boxed everything in, so to speak. And people are still making bottled and bond bourbon today. In fact, it's become even more popular, I would say, than it was in the last 5 years. It's kind of exploded, and there's a ton of bottled and bond product out there.
So first of all, thank you. I mean, when I planned to have you guys on talking about, I wanted to get 3 dummies who didn't like bourbon and knew nothing about it. And I feel like we really nailed it with this panel. So thank you guys, really appreciate it. And I knew that question would, of course, be good for you. And Mike said that he knows what BIB is, but he's just getting into it now. We actually had a box last year, Fruits of Fall, which was an apple brandy box, cocktail box, and so all the cocktails were apple brandy, but they were bottled in bond apple brandy, which again is a really interesting, as you said, backbone for cocktails. Some of them may be a little bit, I think when people aren't accustomed to brandies in general, it may be like a little bit sharper, a little more harsh to them than something that's at 40% ABV or low 40s. But for cocktails, wow, I think one of the few people that made a really good sort of middle of the road on ABV actually were these guys. Copper and Kings did that, like it was like 46% ABV apple brandy, which is pretty great. And then they did the Butchertown, which was actually the one that was the recommendation for that box. And all those cocktails were outstanding. I think people who were whiskey lovers who didn't have a lot of experience with brandy were able to step into that broader category and understand that it's not a bunch of drinks that are going to taste like apple juice, right? It's like, yeah, you can't mess around with BIB apple brandy. It looks pretty great. Second. So yeah, Joe Wynn wrote that he just got that Fruits of Fall box. Every drink is amazing. You can do them with apple brandy, lower proof, or Calvados, 8200, and they have completely different profiles. And yes, the difference in general between apple brandy and the denomination of origin that is Calvados, those can already have differences. But one of the things that we get a lot of questions about or comments about in the private Facebook group for Shaker and Spoon is people sharing Shaker and Spoon cocktails that they've made with other spirits. So they're like, hey, listen, I got the Bring on the Bourbon box. I made all those drinks. I loved all those drinks. And then they either went and picked up a single recipe kit for one of them to repeat it, or they had like one drink left over and they made it with añejo tequila, or they made it with Calvados, or they just picked an entirely different spirit category and just went for it, and then write a post about the results. And it's really fun to watch what people get and then the conversations that happen because of that. One more question for Robert. In your time traveling the country and educating people on a pretty wide range of whiskey, what did you find were the cocktails that really stood out? I'm talking, classics now. But if you think of one that you remember, like the one that I mentioned earlier that Reza did with Elijah Craig and Canton, if there's one that a couple classics that jump out as your go-to for if you want to test out a whiskey, this is the cocktail that I make for it.
Well, it certainly sounds mundane, but a Manhattan and an old fashioned are like classic go-to cocktails for bourbon and for rye whiskey anywhere in the country. And I mean, the old fashioned is still killing it across the country right now. It's been hot forever. I found one of the things I found was, when you make a Manhattan with Scotch, it's a Rob Roy. And I would often turn bourbon drinkers on to Scotch whiskey, giving them a Rob Roy. And it would be, sometimes an enlightening experience. And then conversely, turning Scotch guys on to bourbon by doing it in a bourbon. So those are two big drinks that I think I saw a lot of that people resonated with. Obviously, you're talking about stuff that I saw everywhere, Danny. That's definitely two drinks that I saw everywhere. And then go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say on the and of course, bourbon and ginger is a quintessential thing, just like Irish whiskey and ginger, Scotch whiskey and ginger, and a lemon twist and a dash of bitters. It's awesome. It's awesome. Any time of the year, any season. It's I don't know what it is about ginger, but it works extraordinarily well with whiskey.
Um, one of the things that I wanted to ask all of you about, because I mean, your jobs over the years have entailed you needing to go everywhere from like deep dives in a particular area to traveling around and meeting a lot of different people. One of the things that we like to cover at the end of all of our happy hours is to talk about our sort of industry state of the union. And I would love if each of you have an interesting example of a way that a bar or a restaurant near you has come up with interesting ways to engage their customers now that we are, you know, emerging from this like cloud of the past 2 years that has been very difficult, in particular for operators. If you have like an anecdote, or you saw somebody do an event that you thought was really helpful, and the reason that we talk about it is because so many of the Shaker and Spoon family, these are not a bunch of people that just sit at home and make cocktails. This is a really engaged crew that go out a lot as well, and they take the things that they learn from Shaker and Spoon, and it helps them like figure out what they like when they go to bars and restaurants, and vice versa. They're like, oh, I saw this really cool ingredient and I want to try making a cocktail at home. And so it's this really great back and forth that happens. So maybe they may be able to glean some information from you and share it with their favorite local bar to help them sort of get back into their groove.
I was just thinking about a retail scenario, not a bar, but one thing that I've seen lately that I have not witnessed in all the years I've been in this business is there's a, and you know, this is easy to do in a bar because you have the ability to give people a wee taste. You'll see what I'm saying when I go there, but you can sample your customers on products to, you know, get their approval, and then of course you serve them. There's a retail store here in Tampa that has all their, you know, their more higher end whiskey behind the counter, but each bottle has an open bottle in front of it, and the bottles are open so that their customers who are come in shopping and they're interested in a particular whiskey, but they're not sure they want to spend $70 or more on a whiskey that they haven't tasted, the guy pours them a little sample. And it's kind of a pain in the ass for us because we're constantly having to replenish these damn whiskeys and we make nothing on it. But in the long run, we do, because your brands sell through, your products sell through, and the consumers are actually getting exposure by being able to taste stuff that they may be hesitant to pursue otherwise. When it comes to bars, like super innovative stuff that I've seen lately, right now, I think everybody is just super happy to be back at work. And a lot of bars that I'm witnessing are struggling with staffing. And so they're really just trying to keep the place staffed and get through the night without having the luxury of getting super geeky creative in ways to market the brands. And I hope that changes soon. But right now, I don't see a whole lot of, at least in my market, you know, super innovative, cool things that I could share that I see that work. I mean, whiskey flights, you know, that's been around for years, and that's always, I think, a good idea. But honestly, you know, regretfully, I can't think of anything that stands out on the on-premise that I can divulge at this moment.
No worries. The point is just to have sort of like that open discussion, because people will come up with ideas, and again, they may have a really good relationship with their local retailer or bar and be able to say like, hey, this is a thing that I just heard about. Do you know,
yeah.
you try doing it? It can't hurt. Bruce, did you have something in mind?
Yeah, if it's like interesting stuff that I've seen in a bar, my probably favorite cocktail in Louisville right now it's called the Acid Cat Spirit Guide. It has a buzz button, which is also known as a Szechuan button.
Oh, cool.
And it's a plant. It's not actual peppercorn, but it has the same effect that Szechuan peppercorn has. It's in a bar here called Expo, right downtown Louisville. and it does not list the ingredients because it's, you know, part of the fun. But it does. It kind of numbs the taste buds, and then the drink itself is very, you know, fruity and tart and sour, and with that kind of buzz button, it kind of shocks the palate a little bit, and it's just very interesting. And I've not had one of those before. I mean, you were talking about like Christine picked out the Russell's 10, like bartenders probably like Christine that are very high level. That this might be very like, you know, cliche or something. I'm not sure. But to me, a guy from Kentucky, it's pretty neat. And that's been probably the most interesting thing that I've seen.
I've always wanted to do a cocktail competition where, you know, you're going to be the first person and do something that's going to like mess up the palate for everyone, for all the other drinks moving
That would do it. Yeah, that would do it.
Yeah. Or know that you're going to be the last person and get like the person who's serving first to, I don't know, put like a tab of acid in everybody's cocktail, you know? So like everyone's super euphoric by the time they get to yours. They're gonna be like, yours is the most amazing drink I've ever had in my life. So yeah, we are not condoning, by the way, for anybody to do that in order for their local bars and restaurants to get more customers. So just putting that out there. Yeah.
There's a gentleman in Colorado that makes a liqueur, although it may not be a liqueur because I think it's slightly higher alcohol, but it's called Tingala. And it has the ting flower, which has the same thing as that Szechuan peppercorn and the ingredient Mr. Russell was referring to. And it has a little hint of cinnamon and vanilla. And it's a very interesting, you know, flavor dynamic to try to work with. And we utilized it in some cocktails, but one of our funniest things to do when some really obnoxious people would come in, like we'd get like inundated with these people and they'd come in and we want shots. And of course, you know, we could be kind and give them some vodka or some, you know, tequila, but we'd always say, yeah, shots. And we'd pour them Tingala and watch the shock and dismay on their faces. And some of them would love it. And some of them would be like, what the hell did I walk into? And then we'd all take these rattlers that we had behind the bar and we'd rattle them and scream, Tingala! Like you just got Tingala. So yeah, I'm familiar with this flavor profile you speak of.
Can you imagine getting jimmied and Tingala in the same night? I feel like that'd be too much. Yeah. Rachel wrote Pedal Pub. That's what she thinks they're called.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, one thing that Michael sort of alluded to earlier was about flavored products. There are some really interesting bourbon-based products out there, like either line extensions that have happened over the years, and actually the Russell family was one of the people that put them out. And I was wondering, Bruce, if you can sort of touch upon that, because it really started a thing that wasn't happening up until that point.
Yeah, I actually have talk about secondary. This might be my most prized secondary possession here. A bottle of the original, Michael knows what this is. A bottle of the original Wild Turkey liqueur with honey. This was back when it was 60 proof, so it was actually more of a liqueur than what it is today. And more of today, just a flavored bourbon. But Jimmy was one of the very first, might have been the first American whiskey producer that came out with like a readily available flavored product. He came out with it in 76. So I always like to give him a hard time because he doesn't really like flavored whiskey products. Nobody bought any of it for a very, very long time until we changed the name. It did actually change a couple times, but once it changed to American Honey, it blew up, and now it's one of the biggest products in Campari's entire portfolio. My favorite fun fact is it's a more than 500,000 case brand. It's a big brand. And I think more than 50% of the total cases are sold solely in the state of Missouri. So it don't ask me why. It's just where it's all sold. But American Honey. Jimmy started the original one in this like cool little bottle in 76. I'm not a big flavored whiskey drinker. They are very important to our category. I drink American Honey with lemonade if I'm on a boat. You know, that's my kind of go-to thing. Maybe there's maybe the Ozarks there in Missouri. Maybe that's what they're all doing.
Maybe like because now that everybody in the world is familiar with the Ozarks, they know that just everybody's on boats all the time.
Yeah, I saw the show, so now I know how it works.
Right. Yeah, you're like, listen, if I'm not out on the water buying heroin, I'm probably drinking honey whiskey. So
yeah, makes sense.
Which is great. Thank you. Yeah, there are some really interesting line extensions that I would say if you see a brand that you like out there in the world that has made some kind of line extension and you liked the product and you like what they do and they're not out there doing a gazillion different line extensions, it's worth giving it a shot. There's some that, like, you know, somebody bought, you know, a stock of inexpensive whiskey, did, like, you know, a flavor blend on it, and, you know, they're going to sell it like hotcakes. But you feel like, you know, your Wild Turkeys, your Jack Daniels, your producers who are making good products, if you like their regular product and they're not out there, you know, doing this all the time, and once in a while they come out with something interesting, it's worth the shot. You never know. So we are I'm going to open up for Q&A if anybody has any questions while we have our esteemed panel before we get into the end of our happy hour. We'd love to be able to have them answer any questions. We have like enough amount of people where, like, if you guys want to pop it into the chat, you can do that. Otherwise, you can unmute for a second and ask a question. We have time for a couple. Oh, Mike said, Mr. Russell, you may have covered this earlier, but our distillery tour is up and running. He's from Cleveland, and he and his wife are planning to make it back to Kentucky.
Awesome. I might see you up in Cleveland. I'm going to be up there in about 3 or 4 weeks. Right now, everybody is open. We are kind of open. Our main visitor center is actually closed for renovation right now. So we're actually running out of our original visitor center. It's a little old station master's house down the road. But yeah, come on by. Jimmy will probably be sitting in there in the afternoon. If you're going on tours in Kentucky, I would suggest hitting up Distillers Row in Louisville, because you can hit up like 4 or 5 really cool places and like the most beautiful showroom type places in the United States. I mean, the new modern distillery operations and kind of experiences they've built down here in downtown Louisville are awesome. And then Buffalo Trace, I think, gives the best tours of the ones I've been on. If you ever get a chance, there's a dude named Freddie Johnson, who is a rock star in this industry, who gives tours out there. I think Makers is my favorite location. It's in the middle of nowhere. You'll be driving out there and you'll be like, we've gone too far. You haven't, you'll get there. But it is, and I say this in a very loving way, it's like going into Disney World. I mean, it's beautiful. There's art installations and stuff that's housing and buildings that are, you know, from way before Prohibition, and beautiful restaurant. And I mean, we're jealous that our distillery grounds doesn't look like that. It's really awesome. I love them. I love Denny and Jane that make their whiskey over there. So if you get a chance to visit there, you'll have a good time.
I just spoke with Megan Breyer earlier today. They literally reopened Maker's Mark today.
Oh, great.
Yeah, like the distillery today is their first day. So awesome. For those, if you are thinking about that, Mike, that is a good one to get to, and they are reopened and they do great tours.
I want to just pass on to folks, do not go without setting up reservations. Things are really busy now, especially Friday, Saturdays. And so you could get closed out of your favorite distillery just walking in. And not all places have just a plain tasting experience or a bar. You may have to do a tasting and a tour. So I do recommend, I mean, it can be wonderful, and I highly recommend just making sure you're booked before you go.
And also that's also like a sort of post-COVID-y thing also. It was busy before, but now I think in planning people are much, it's the same with that we're finding with bars and restaurants as well. If it's a place that needs reservations, there was actually a bar that I went to recently. They said they had opened and it wasn't very busy. The moment they got on talk to take reservations for the bar, all of a sudden it picked up. because people want to be able to plan a little bit more. But that's a really good point. Thank you. You also got a question. Do you know when Hardwater is going to be reopening?
Yeah,
I know you're not there anymore, but still.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're going to have to find another location. I'm not sure that they ever sorted out the financials, that is the back rent, from when everything was shut down. And I think whatever settlement they do might lead them to open elsewhere, which will be a very different experience, of course. But they still have that collection. I helped count it, in fact, last winter, actually winter before last. It's eye-watering how much good whiskey they have there. How
Well,
much
maybe
wild turkey they have.
Maybe you and Bruce can get in cahoots and open like a boat again in the Ozarks, where you can sell all this whiskey without proper licensing on the water, because apparently everything's legal on the water, right?
Yeah,
we got the Ohio River. We can do it right here in Louisville.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay.
We can take you down the falls while you're drinking.
There you go.
Nice. That's amazing. Okay. So on cocktails. Oh, so besides this month's wonderful cocktails, nice plug, Liz. Thank you. What cocktails would you suggest to someone who has never had bourbon before? I'll leave that open to anybody.
An amazingly great whiskey sour made with egg white.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. A sour or maybe a paper plain, something a little bit lighter.
Yeah. Paper plain, outstanding.
Yeah. Sours are made well, like for, I wouldn't say introductory, but I would say for people who are not going like the Sasha Petrosky, like booze forward sort of cocktail build. If you're doing like a 2 3/4 sour, those work every time. And so, you know, again, to sort of put that out there into the world, that is, 2 ounces of bourbon, 3/4 of 1-to-1 simple syrup, 3/4 lemon. And we say 3/4 egg white, but you don't actually measure it, right? It's usually between 3/4 and an ounce. You dry shake it, then you add ice, you shake it harder again. And personally, like if you are a person that loves to drink stuff off of ice, then you can strain it. But I like all the fluff, and so I'd rather do like a dump drink, and you can garnish it with like lemon peel or a cherry or a cherry lemon flag. Such a great drink to drink. And plus, since she's sort of saying nice things about Shaker and Spoon anyway, there are a bunch of bourbon cocktails in the Make More store, in the Shaker and Spoon Make More store. So if you go in there and you filter for bourbon in the cocktail kits, you're going to see the Rough Diamond, the Poncho and Lefty. You're still going to see things that fall under both Tennessee whiskey and bourbon and other whiskey cocktails. And again, people like to experiment with other spirits. You might look at one of the tequila cocktails and realize that that's actually going to go really well. Yeah.
There's one that I would recommend to somebody that's not familiar with bourbon cocktails and wants something really easy and approachable, and that's taking a spiced apple cider and an unfiltered cider, not some clear shelf-stable stuff that's like dead, denatured nonsense, but like the funky stuff, the really good cider that you want on a nice cold winter night. Take that apple cider and put some bourbon in it and a fresh squeeze of lemon juice, maybe a dash of Angostura on top. It's beautiful any time of the year, over the rocks. Apple and bourbon goes brilliantly together.
That is a good call. Okay.
You got a hot toddy too.
Yeah, we forgot the hot toddy.
Give you right up, yeah.
Oh, and the Living Proof. That's another great one. That's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in a cocktail. It like magically balances out. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but when people talk about screwball, I'm like, you got to have the Living Proof cocktail. It's like, it's sesame, it's tahini and strawberry preserves and lemon and bourbon. It's delicious. So, okay. So I have, each of you have a trivia question to ask.
I mean, I guess, what is the first flavored whiskey product we came out with, and what year did Jimmy come out?
Good Lord, that was fast. Oh my God.
Damn.
Yeah. And by the way, you combined two questions and she still got it right.
Oh no.
Yeah. So the what year did Jimmy start at Wild Turkey? That was 1954. And what was the first thing besides the 101 that Jimmy started to make? And that was the American Honey. So, and that was 1976, just so you guys know.
It was 76, yeah.
I didn't realize how
76.
early that was. I thought it was much later. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, so Trisha, do me a favor and again, do a direct message to Shaker and Spoon in the chat and make sure that they have which email address you use on your Shaker and Spoon account.
We'll have some cool for you.
All right. Yeah, and we don't know what it is yet, but Bruce will find something fun for you. Robert, I have something already fun to send them on your behalf, and I think that any of your questions would be great. So go for it. And remember, this is Robert Sickler, so this may be a deep cut. So you guys have to work for it.
Well, since it's a cocktail savvy crowd, I think this will be an easy one. The person who's going to win is the person with the fastest fingers. So what are the 3 key components of a Boulevardier cocktail?
This is the part where we all stare in this corner. Oh, wait, got it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like.
Jimmy.
Yeah. Jimmy nailed it. Well done.
Well done, Jimmy, but also Lacey, Rochelle, all super quick. Marge.
Everybody's super quick. Yeah.
Great drink.
That was awesome. Okay, so Jimmy, well done. Make sure that you message a Shaker and Spoon handle. And then for Michael, I've got one for you here. Okay. Michael's question, mind if I do it for you? This is based on what something. Okay. So his is going to be a 2-parter. If you already won, by the way, you can't win again. He actually mentioned 3 bourbons that are his favorite value bourbons. Please name at least 2 out of the 3 and you will win this prize.
Nice.
Okay, Lacey made up for it. Boom, done. Fast. That was great. So yeah, so Elijah Craig and Henry Mckenna. Does anybody know what the third one was? Yeah. It was like this. We had some fast answers. It was like a little bit of a pause and then bam, explosive.
Rochelle's got it there.
Yeah.
Trisha nailed it. The JTS Brown. Great, awesome. Guys, this was really fun. Thank you so much for taking the time off to join us. Really appreciate your competing kick-ass back bars. I think Bruce still wins because he had a dog. If a dog pops into the happy hour, you always win. So thank you very much for joining us. And of course, to our Shaker and Spoon family, like, you know, we're so thankful for you every day. We love the conversations that y'all have with each other and being able to share all this fun information with you. If you have any questions for our panelists, again, you can DM them on Instagram. I put their handles back up at the top of the chat. And please, if you have any questions for us, you can always message us. And we're, you know, even though we're sort of diving into the talking about the vodka brunch box now, which is our June box, there's still a lot of discussion to be had on bourbon. So don't be bashful and please, you know, put those out there whenever you can. But for the time being, cheers to everybody. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Cheers, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Cheers, everyone.